Bonjour tout le monde. Hi everyone. We're going to kick things off, and I'll just say a few quick words to welcome everyone. I know there's a lot of people standing in the back. There's some seats in front. If you don't want to be the cool kids in the back, you could sit in front. So good afternoon. Welcome to the Rise of the Venture Scientist. We're extremely happy to welcome you here today at the Mecca of AI in Mila with scientists, researchers, operators, and a bunch of founders that are in the room. So we're really excited. And we're all gathered here today because we all know one thing, that the future is really going to be built at the intersection of deep science and entrepreneurship. So we're really excited over the next few hours to showcase a few trailblazers that are really leading the way and that have really demonstrated ambition. And that's what we're really trying to demonstrate today on the stage. People that have shown that you're able to innovate, scale, raise capital, make a dent in the in a few industries, and dare I say, change the world. But that might be a bit too cheesy. So maybe a quick show of hands. Who here is a founder, an entrepreneur? Just so I could get a good sense. Who considers themselves to be a scientist? Any people? Okay. And then finally, do we have any investors in the room? Make sure they're not hiding. Okay, so those are the people with the money bags. Obviously we're here not just to talk, but also spark collaborations. So we have a really good mix of people in this room today, so really excited to kick things off. And before we get the show going, I'm just going to quickly run you guys through the agenda of the day, what we have in store, so we're really happy. So we're going to kick things off with Monsieur Hugo Larochelle, that's going to say a few welcoming words, followed by a panel of some really seasoned AI veterans that have built and exited multiple businesses, followed by a panel of the 3 largest Canadian VC funds. And then, of course, we have Joëlle Pineau that'll be in a fireside chat with Sanjana from Reliant Ventures. And with that, maybe a last few housekeeping items. This is being recorded, so we're full house today, so I want to say the people in the room be very happy because we had to turn away a lot of people at the end, but this will be available online as a podcast and as a YouTube video after the fact as well. And with that, without any further ado, I'd like to welcome on the stage Hugo Larochelle, Scientific Director at Mila.
All right, how's everyone doing? It's so great to see so many of you here today for this event. I'm really, really glad that I get to kick us off right now. I'm Hugo Larochelle, I'm the Scientific Director at Mila. I'm really proud to be here for this event. So as you know, this is an event dedicated to entrepreneurship. And perhaps it might be surprising to some of you that a research scientist is kicking us off for this event. Indeed, I think a caricature research scientist is someone mostly interested in writing papers, not necessarily building businesses. That I have to say that's sort of what I thought early on in my career when I was a PhD student. I really saw mostly myself as having a role of contributing knowledge through scientific publications. And with time, and notably through my experience at Google, I realized that I was unnecessarily limiting myself, reducing my role to much less than it could be or should be. So I think we are all of us scientists want to change the world. That is ultimately the goal that we set ourselves. We want to make it better. We want to make it more rational, more sane, more functional. And yes, we do that first with knowledge and with discoveries. But then we should take that knowledge and make it into something real, concrete, that really change the world and make it better. So to me, this is the real theme of today's event. We want to allow researchers to fully realize their ambition and potential to take their research and build something to create something real, with real-world impact, the impact that you can have. So I want you to develop your confidence that you can do that. And for notably the students who are here, I want you to feel equipped that you can create for yourself, when you'll graduate, your ideal job. The best possible job, the most rewarding job, the job where you call the shots and you drive the mission. So today is Mila's attempt at putting you on that learning journey. Be on the lookout for other opportunities. We have a great team led by Stéphane Marceau, who's on a mission to make sure that we support you in that learning journey. So we fully leverage and you fully leverage your potential as a venture scientist. So that's all I had today. Let's not wait any further and start this event. I really hope you'll enjoy it, and thank you all for being here. Thanks.
Thank you, Hugo. That was great. Super inspiring. So to kick things off, first panel that we have is, I want to say you're in for a treat. We have 4 brilliant people that I'm very lucky to know. I'll introduce them briefly. I'll ask them all to come on stage right now, actually, if that's okay. So first off, we have Marc Bellemare, who's going to be our moderator. I'll ask you, Marc, to sit at the end, followed by Paul Kruszewski, Jean-Simon, and Jacomo. I'll do very brief intros because I know Marc's going to ask them again. So Marc is an AI scientist. Many of you, if you know him, he's a product of Mila. He started this company called Reliant AI, which I highly recommend you check out. A very, very cool company. Paul Kruszewski, he's a deep tech entrepreneur, a founder of Wrench, a computer vision company that developed AI to digitize human motion, acquired by Hinge Health in 2021. He holds a PhD in computer science from McGill. This is your 4th startup you're starting. So yeah, he has a little bit of experience, and sorry, a bit of gray hair too. Jean-Simon from Brainbox, co-founder and CEO of Brainbox AI, technology expert specializing in fast and efficient migration of tech innovations to commercial applications, over 25 years of experience. Brainbox was acquired by a company called Train Technologies. Number wasn't disclosed, but my understanding is many, many zeros. So I won't ask the number, but very successful founder. And last but not least, Jacomo Corbo, founder of PhysicsX and CEO, company applying AI to advanced simulation engineering, holds a PhD in computational physics from Harvard, and combines deep scientific expertise with strategic insight. His company raised over 160 million, if I'm not mistaken. And without more time, pass it off to Marc.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Nectar, for the great intro. As Hugo was saying, the theme here today is the venture scientist. And it's a real privilege to be in this room today as a Canada C4AI chair, as a Mila industry member, with folks that I never see otherwise in this room. So the folks next to my left who all build amazing startups and successfully exited them. So this is an exceptional event, and I hope we'll learn a bit more about this today. So in the theme of venture scientist, for me, I started Reliant a little bit over 2 years ago. And as a scientist, there was a lot of unknowns when you get started. A lot of things don't look, like Hugo said, like the research life, right? And so I'd love to use this panel to elucidate a little bit, a few of these things through these folks' personal experiences and give you a flavor for what the journey can look like from a researcher all the way to many zeros, like Nectar said. So Paul, Jean-Simon, Jacomo, thank you so much. Maybe we can start with simply briefly introducing yourself a little bit more, the kind of startups you've built, what you're excited about, how did you start either your first startup or your 4th startup, and from a scientist perspective, what was that spark? You went from an idea to a company. Let's get started with you, Paul.
Is it on?
It is
on. Oh, awesome. Kind of startups I build is at the intersection of computer graphics and AI, computer vision. And for the nerds in the audience, you can think of those inverse functions, right? Like computer graphics is data generates pixels, and computer vision is pixels generate data. But really at that intersection with interactivity. So I was the first CTO of Behavior, actually, who were right over there, Behavior Interactive. So that's what gets me excited, is building interactive systems where humans can interact with AIs. So I'm working on digital humans, interactive digital humans.
All right. Jean-Simon Venne. Brainbox AI. Well, Brainbox AI is, if you think of the autonomous car, it's kind of the same thing, but for building, but more precisely for the HVAC. So what is the HVAC? It's all of the equipment which are cooling, heating, making sure the ventilation is properly done in the building. The issue is that kind of layer is usually in between 50 to 70% of the energy consumed by the building. So what we did is we developed an algorithm. It's a kind of a mixture of deep learning with operational research algorithm. So I like to call operational research algorithm like the old tech. We used to do it in the 90s and then even in the 80s when there was mainframe computer available to do some computing. And we're mixing it with the capability of predict that we could get when we train a neural net. The two together, without any human intervention, so no human in the loop, we are operating these equipment, and the goal is a multi-objective equation. Can we do it in a better fashion than whatever existing programmation already exists in the controllers? So we usually we're able to extract another 10, 15, 20, 25% energy savings, and we are deployed now, and this morning I did check, we're in 18,900 buildings throughout the planet, and hopefully we're going to finish the year at 20,000.
Awesome. Well, delighted to be here. Thanks to Nectar and to Marc for the invitation. Maybe in the first place, I'm not a computational physicist. My PhD was in computer science, but I did do electrical engineering at Magaly here. I'm a rehabilitated Montrealer, I could say, because I left after my undergraduate, did my graduate and postgraduate studies in the US and was in the UK for some time, and then after that came back to Montreal in the first place on account of my wife, who's an academic, has a Canada Research Chair, runs an immunology department, research lab at McGill University. My first startup was a company called Quantum Black. Some of you may have heard of it. We had space in Mila for some time, shortly after it opened. It's now part of McKinsey's AI arm. But we started on the back of myself and my two co-founders, recognizing that a lot of the techniques maybe that we took for granted in computer science, a lot of machine learning, wasn't terribly well adopted in advanced industries, and in particular with Formula One teams. I was in that world for some 4 years. My two co-founders also had ties to F1, so we started really with 3 Formula One teams as our anchor customers, and in virtue of the technical partnerships that they have with much larger engineering firms, with Boeing and Rolls-Royce Aerospace that we worked in tandem with. But it is an example of us, our being proficient and having certain expertise, technical expertise, giving us a very different perspective on solutions to problems that were otherwise being solved in very different ways within vehicle dynamics departments, control systems, people who are looking at materials characterization, materials and composites groups, aerodynamics. And a lot of that actually carries over to where I am right now with PhysicsX. So we like to describe what we're doing as building a new engineering simulation software stack, and a lot of what we're setting out to do is change what the computer-around simulation looks like. So changing physics and chemistry simulation that's otherwise happening by numerical simulation for the most part, and trying to move that to inference from what's otherwise solving nonlinear partial differential equations by finite differences on meshes. And a lot of this is predicated on a lot of advances that have been happening really since about 2016, in the first place around geometric deep learning, before a few other formalisms, including with neural operators. So much of what NeurIPS and ICML are concerned with today centers on physics and chemistry, biology as well, but this is really starting to usher in a revolution in these industries, and so we're playing a part in all of that.
Amazing. So you could all have been researchers publishing papers like Hugo said earlier. Instead, you chose to build a company. Can you tell us a bit why? Why did you choose the hard path?
I'm a builder. I like building things. I like seeing them in the world, and a paper just doesn't suffice, and the delight of two things. Seeing people react to it is great, but then in my advancing years, what I didn't expect was, so my last company got bought by Hinge Health, the largest digital physiotherapy company, and I was at a conference, and some guy came up to me, he said, "Are you Paul from Hinge Health?" And he said, yeah, I'm like, sure, whatever. It was CDL, Creative Destruction Lab, that's how we knew each other. And he said, "Your software saved my wife's life." And I can tell you this is not why I started that company. I started the company because I thought it was cool. But that turned out to be a massive, incredible.
None of my
field.
papers have saved somebody yet, I think.
Yeah, but I think where I was trying to go with that is that it's like you have to go all the way, if you really want to change the world, you have to go all the way to the end to touch the world, not inspire someone to touch the world.
Jean-Simon, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, well, of course, you need to be a builder. Like, if you don't like to build, you're going to be miserable. So I think I was a builder since I was a kid, but it took me a lot of time to realize it. So the question is, okay, you keep building things. Like, if you see my house, it's a perpetual renovation, right? A never-ending project. So this is great, right? I cook up by me during the weekend and drive my wife's crazy. But really, what's the purpose? Except getting a beautiful house eventually one day. So the purpose is like, what do you need to build to have an impact? And it goes to that discussion, right? So I think in my entire career, I was frustrated by the fact that I had a couple of ideas, we could do things, but it was either the technology was not really capable of doing it yet, or it was too expensive. The CFO was saying, no way, I don't want to give you that money. We're reaching a point, and I say like probably the last 10 years, we're reaching the point where the technology capability is so advanced and the cost of using it is so low that the bottleneck is shifting from a technology bottleneck or a financing bottleneck to a brainstorming bottleneck. So now we have every ingredient to change the world. We just need to figure out what's the perfect combination that's going to make it work. So it's really like, here's a bottleneck. So when you really reach that point and say, okay, now my limitation is my capability to find the right combination of how I'm going to assemble the tech to create an impact, well, you start working day and night, right? And what do you want to change? Well, in our case, it was pretty obvious, right? We're losing the planet. I mean, no matter how you look at it, and I don't want to depress the audience here, we're losing it. And unfortunately, the government are not the solution. They try, but they have to go to election every 4 years, so that's miserable for them, and really we need a long-term plan. So how can we use the technology to save the planet and create a business model which is using new tech so we could make money and saving the planet at the same time? So we could play that monopoly game that everybody's playing on this planet, not changing the rules, but at the same time, you're making money while you're saving the planet. And the limitation is the technology. Like, you need to find the right combination. In our case, we did find something quite interesting, but there's so many other fields where it's waiting for the technology, it's waiting for the solution.
Amazing, Giacomo.
I mean, I think I've been motivated by real-world problems for most of my career. My PhD was actually pretty theoretical. It was really around topics at the interface of computer science and economics, so around algorithmic game theory. It's a lot of theorem proving. The thing that pulled me into the real world was getting into Formula One, and all of a sudden finding myself in this strange environment, but which was a whole lot of fun. But one of the things it really forced me to really think about empirical modeling in ways that I hadn't really focused on that. It wasn't really the focus of my PhD. Certainly hadn't done anything like that even in my undergraduate. And I just got captivated by the problem of modeling real world phenomena. If I to answer your question, maybe why do the hard things? I think, given a certain selection of problems, I think, some of the most intellectually captivating ones will also translate to real-world problems, and real-world problems that are incredibly important along, a number of different dimensions. Like the things that we're touching right now, we work across a few different sectors, but our largest sector is aerospace and defense. We're working with Leonardo Aerospace, BAE Systems, and Mitsubishi on the Global Combat Aircraft program. So this is a successor to the Eurofighter. There are few problems, in aircraft programs of that scales, but also that would with the same urgency. If we think about its importance to underwriting Western security, we're working with Rio Tinto in a few different places, but including within Rio Tinto Aluminium. And some of the things that we're doing are really to drive down the energy intensity, the power intensity of producing aluminum or aluminium, depending on where you're from. One of the most important things that Rio Tinto is trying to do is enable something they've been very public about called flex power, and this is really modulating, the power intensity at which you run these smelters. It's incredibly important for the province of Quebec and to its ability to be able to balance the grid as we continue to try to, make energy more and more of an export product. We're doing the same thing in semiconductors, working with Applied Materials on new foundries, silicon carbide foundries, silicon germanium foundries, and trying to bring those into the world more quickly. So if I think about, the kinds of problems that, in all likelihood, every one of you in this room will have expertise that is incredibly relevant and germane to driving so many hard problems in different industrial segments, in different applications. And it's just a question of, just becoming fascinated and obsessed with one of those and diving in.
That sounds very much like what you're saying. What you're all saying is essentially you come to the industry, you come to the problem, and it's a bit of a best response where you're going to figure out where you want to be, where you can best apply your work, and then, based on the data, then figure this out. You actually make it sound really easy. But, I want to go back to the startup, your first startup, or maybe the second one, and this concept of product market fit, right? Which is the scariest part when you're building a startup. You have an idea, you've built a product, now you have to find people that's going to buy that product, right? As academically minded people, as AI builders, what was the gap between your initial idea and the actual customer who wants to give you money for that idea? And how did you bridge that gap? Maybe Jacomo, you can start.
Sure. So, again, if I think about PhysicsX, it was, the company itself was really started as a vehicle to experiment to start with. The reality is that, if you think about where numerical simulation is a bottleneck, and a bottleneck for a number of things, including, using numerical simulation that's precise enough at the right resolution to be able to, be amenable to a control loop, well, or to search large spaces. We're trying to relax that constraint. We're trying to move it to inference. We're trying to take advantage of, certain published results that are coming out in places like NeurIPS. And the reality is that the papers themselves will dwell on incredibly esoteric problems. Why? Because those papers are incredibly far removed from the reality of high complexity engineering and manufacturing. And so when we started the company, it was really, to try to, prove this out, improve some of these techniques on certain real-world problems, and real-world problems of the, requisite complexity that this would actually be move the needle, that it would represent something novel and interesting. And so we set out for ourselves to say, okay, we're gonna start with, things on a slightly lower end of complexity, no moving parts. It'll be heat exchangers and intercoolers. It's all steady state CFD, computational fluid dynamics simulation. From there, and proving out to ourselves that one, we could really, model the CFD incredibly accurately, and two, be able to optimize these parts, therefore, a whole lot better than, and achieve levels of performance that were much better than, what these commercial parts that are being sold were actually selling for. we then moved into, giving ties that I had to Formula One. We started working with the Formula One team. It was a multi-material finite element analysis problem, very complex composites. And it was the first place where we also tried to prove that we could also train on experimental data, so correct an FEA model by also training on experimental data. And from there, we started moving into things that were incrementally more complex. We started going into turbomachinery, still steady-state physics, hydro turbines, then going a very different end of the scale, looking at an artificial heart pump, before then moving on into process manufacturing industries, into places like aluminum smelting. And so, I would say really like the first 2.5 years of the company were going through a number of different technical milestones before we felt, one, we think there's a very large opportunity here. Two, that opportunity isn't just one that runs through a single industrial segment, but cuts across a number of different industrial sectors. Three, it's one where we're not just talking about one part of the engineering life cycle, but this is incredibly relevant to a lot of the product development life cycle, so not just in design, but downstream of that in manufacturing and into operations. And so a lot of that were also very foundational pieces for us to be able to raise our Series A in October of 23. And so it wasn't really solving for product market fit to start with. It was around those really important, what are the important evidentiary points that corroborate, to help build out the thesis for what the company should be scaling towards. From the A to the B, that's been much more about product market fit for us.
Amazing. Jean-Simon.
Wow, there's so many stories. I think exactly what you described, like going from the lab to the reality is a huge step, and I think that's where you're going to make it or you're going to break it, right? And the question is, how fast do you learn? How fast do you pivot when you're having a failure? And we need to, it's something which is not natural in Canada, especially not in Quebec. Failure is okay. We want failure. Fail as many times as you can. Don't try to be successful. Just fail. Because every time you fail, if you're clever enough, you're going to learn from it. And then you're probably not going to repeat that stupid mistake again. So a couple of stories, working fine, algo working fine, prediction impeccable in a simulation. Everybody's looking at each other. Okay, we'll try it on a real building. So we tried it on we were leasing a floor on De La Montagne, and we tried it on the equipment. We didn't tell the building owner, fortunately, because I don't think he would have said yes. So I could tell you, we destroyed all of the damper on the first day, all of them. And when the mechanical engineer company came and said, what the hell happened? We said, I don't know. No, the big bang, and then nothing is working. And they were like, of course, we remove all of our wire that we were driving the controller. There's one Monday morning where we created... Oh, sorry. Is it recorded? Yeah. Okay.
But it's a great story. Please continue.
One Monday morning, there's so much water dripping on the tenant below us, and we created over the weekend about that thick of ice in the air handling unit because the cooling was just creating more. It was way too cold, basically, and we were it was a big block of ice, and of course it was melting because we were eating the space. And then again, mechanical guy come back and say, what have you done this time? And he's looking at the ice like, how did you manage to do that? I said, well, it's AI, out of control. That's what happened. When we went out of our office, finally, the Collège de Montréal, and that we could record because they know, they agreed to be our first alpha. Of course, they're not paying. So you were saying the first paying customer. Collège de Montréal never paid anything. So alpha user, right? So they have this huge boiler, and they're student, right? Going to class and everything. And I'm looking at my team saying, you think it's going to work? Because if it doesn't work, we're going to hear about it, right? So we're in the basement, and we're modulating this boiler, and I could tell you, every command going back to the controller, there's 6 person looking at it going, yeah, it makes sense, it makes sense. So this is how you make it, right? I call it the pivotal game. So you hit a wall, you pivot. And then you hit another wall, and then you pivot again. You have to do that as fast as possible, because if you take too long to pivot, you're going to run out of money. So you need to get these proof of concept, these technical proof of concept. You need to have the Collège de Montréal say, you know what, it's working. I see the impact on my bill. It is working. And then, oh, can we record you? Can we make like a one marketing pager? Like, and this is how you slowly make it to a paying customer.
What I love about both of your stories is, in many ways to me, this is a different kind of research, but it's still research. When you're doing research, you want to fail fast. Right? The first thing you learn as a graduate student is don't spend a year trying to prove a hypothesis. You should get there in a month at most, right? And you learn to be faster at that as a researcher. It's a different kind of research skill, so then do this with a real building or with a real race car. So, Paul, to you.
So this actually makes me think about company one. So when I was CTO of behavior in 2000, I sort of said to myself, I see the future of video games. There's going to be all these components. I won't bore you. There will be an AI component. And I'm going to build that company. I did not do any good market research. I'm a very bad entrepreneur. Still don't do good market research. But anyways, I was convinced that special effects houses would buy my crowd simulator and video game companies would buy it. And I was convinced. And I wanted it. Video games is sexy. Film is even more sexy. And, so we pushed for 2-3 years selling to film people. And they're the worst because they're called golden eyes and they'll criticize one pixel. And it was just beating them. And then you'd go to sell to game developers, selling this software. And they're some of the greatest programmers in the world. So they would be like, you're stupid, I can do better. It doesn't matter if they were wrong. That was their attitude. So they were just mean and they would just beat on you. And then I was at a conference once, and where I'm trying to go with this is you got to really open your mind. I was at a conference, and I had like long blonde hair, and I was like, la, la, la. And, and this, dweeby academic comes up to me, and he says, do you do military? I'm like, no, man, I don't do military. This was like 2005. I don't do that stuff. It's bad. He's like, because your military would really love your stuff. Anyways, thank God for Rick McKenzie's, because he was a researcher in the States. And I said, well, you know what, we'll just start collaborating. And we started working with this guy. And we started to do military simulation. And number one, they were nice, they were friendly. And then we went to a conference and we showed the stuff. And like the other conferences, people were interested, but there was no propensity to action, right? People were flocking our booth. It was crazy. And we kept going. And we said, okay, let's just keep doing this. Even though our hearts weren't there, because we wanted to be the cool kids in games, but the military people, we just started making deals. Like I could go into deals like where like the Secret Service just bought our stuff in 20 minutes. And I was like, what? Said, we'll send you a check. I'm like, awesome. And like the finals is like, we're at this conference. There's this one big military company that has this beautiful booth, empty. And then ours, we had this crappy little 10 by 10. And everyone's coming to this thing. And soon, like, all the people from that business, you know how this ends, right? And then they bought us like a couple months later. Where I'm going with this is, you're going to know, it's like love, right? You can't force love and you can't force product market fit. Like, it's there. When it's there, you'll know it. You will know it, you will feel it, because it will be the easiest, most joyous thing ever. To get there will be pain and ugly. But when you go, and then you've got to have the courage to say, yeah, double down on that, right? Oh, but I wanted to do this. And sometimes you got to, like, with your team, you got to monkey with them. Like, whoa, we said we're going to do that, and especially mission-driven people. But product market fit will speak to you. Listen.
All right, well, I'm still listening, but would love to hear the next steps of that journey, which is, you build a successful company, you get that traction, you get those proof points out. Let's talk about the exit. When you look back, can you explain the exit? Do you know what would what do you do that's easier the second time around? Tell us more about this.
The third exit was the weirdest exit ever, because like in the old days, in the pre-pandemic days, you work in an industry, you get to know each other at conferences, and you build up this, and you work your way up the food chain in all these groups, right? This one, it was in the middle of the pandemic, 2022, and I see this guy on LinkedIn looked at my profile, and I look him up, and I'm like, I think he should be a customer. So I write him, I said, you should be a customer. And so he sets up a call, and we start talking, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to sell, blah, blah, blah. I want to buy your company. He was like, what? I want to buy your company. I'm like, no, but I don't want to sell. I want to partner with you. I want to buy it. Or if I don't buy, anyways, I won't go into details because we're still friends. Anyways, I think that was like really like speed dating. And I think that maybe the new norm. The only advice I have for you guys is cash flow, cash flow, cash flow. It took a long time to get that deal closed. It took 7 months. My CFO did an amazing job of managing our cash flow. And if he had not managed our cash flow, we would have died before the deal closed. So that's my learning.
All right, Jean-Simon.
Yeah, I don't. If Sam is still in the room, I saw him earlier. Anyway, I think he left. So Sam is my partner in crime. Sam was in charge of doing the financing. So and it was. I think we were exactly like it's a bit like a surprise, right? It was summer of '24. We were starting our next round. It should be like it was to be a big round. Valuation was at the right place. We were happy. Our lead investor was going to be Train Technology, was pretty much all booked. We were more working on the secondary package, and I was on vacation in Europe with my wife, and I remember I was on the highway, and our main contact at Train Technology called me, and I take the call, right? You're lead investor, so you want to make sure everything is okay while you're taking only a week of vacation. First thing he says, like, and he's on a speakerphone, so my wife is listening, going like, oh, is that important? Do you really need to take that call? And he started the call and says, we're not going to be lead. We're not doing the investment round. So I like, oh shit, I'm losing my lead investor. This is not good. I was driving. Like, and my wife looked at me and said, oh, that's not going to be a good vacation. And then there's a pause, and I'm waiting, because who talk first lose in these things. So I'm waiting for him to explain, right? And he goes like, we want to buy you out. And then I nearly made an accident, because I didn't saw that coming. I said, what? And he repeated it, said, we looked at it, Jean-Simon, why should we just invest and then buy you out in 4 or 5 years at a higher price? Let's settle now and move on, right? Time is the essence. And I went, okay. I think I did find a rest area quite rapidly and said, okay, now I need to call Sam because things are, and we were not ready. Like, we were not in that mindset. We were like, okay, we're going to sell? Wow, we had grand plans. What's going to happen with these grand plans? And then you start to evaluate the risk. Should we keep going? The risk of execution, dilution. So if we sell in 4 years, how much money we're going to make versus selling now? What is the worth the risk? And then you start to slowly cook to the idea that maybe it's the time, and you sign the LOI, right?
All right, Giacomo.
I mean, Mark, it's a question worth asking, because I think everyone should have this a little bit in the back of their mind on the one hand, as a point of practicality, but it's not what you should be setting out to do, right? Like, you don't solve for the exit. It's actually interesting in the space that I'm in right now, the world of advanced engineering tools, advanced manufacturing tools, because the incumbents are so incredibly entrenched, and it's almost an oligopoly. You have, it's the likes of, Synopsys. So, for example, that purchased Ansys in a $35 billion transaction, that just cleared earlier this year. You've got Siemens, for example, that is also highly acquisitive. So, they purchased Automatix earlier this year for $5.3 billion. They purchased Altair, I think, in a transaction that's, a little bit more than $9 billion. You've got Dassault Systems as well. But the point is that because it's such, almost an oligopoly, because the incumbents are so entrenched, they have distribution advantage, and they're acquisitive, I kind of feel like you have a whole generation of innovation where the founders, the entrepreneurs have been building things to be acquired. And it's driven like some, incredible suboptimality in what these businesses ultimately look like. They're small. They have got bizarre gaps. They don't extend into, a broad or expansive enough even market opportunity that's right there for that. So they don't go into adjacencies. And I feel like they've tried to be very capital efficient. And there's merit to that. I think everyone needs to reason about their own individual situation, circumstantially based on first principles. But, if I think about what I was, and my co-founder Robin were setting out to do with PhysicsX, it is to build a category-defining company. We see a generational opportunity to really change, what the software that powers engineering and manufacturing looks like across a few different industries. And we're out to, we're committed to raising the capital to be able to do just that. So it is very capital consumptive. We raised our B earlier this year. I'm already thinking about like the next round for us. And that's also means, it's also a very expansive and exciting opportunity to be building into. It's also the thing that helps us, recruit some of the very top talent, right? It's the fact that, yes, we have a part of the organization that works on very applied problems and works closely with our customers. We also have, research which is really working on some of the foundation models of physics that we're working on and the compute to drive that. And then after we're working on the software stack, so the product part of the organization. So, to your point on exit, I think it's something to be mindful of, to have in the back of your mind, and to be thinking about, especially with any strategics that you bring onto your cap table. But it's not something to solve for prima facie.
Amazing. I wish we had a bit more time to dig into this question. I can see we're almost at time. I'd love to wrap up with just a few words from you, a few thoughts on, is AI different? Are AI startups today different? What's the future of AI startups? Jean-Simon first.
Extremely rapid. So expect we could now create a startup with a very few people. So you don't need to hire 80 people. You could do it like with 10, and you're going to move extremely rapidly. So shelf life is very, very quick. So create value as fast as you can.
Yeah, I think we're 9 people, and I think we're working like 25 compared to my last. I would say there's no moats, and sorry for the IP lawyers here, no. There's just nothing. It's execution. Open source and execution. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, I buy that. And, and I would say a lot of it is if there is something that's a little bit more defensible, it's basically, your opportunity to sell into that market and so it's vertical rather than horizontal.
All right. Well, this was an absolutely amazing panel. Thank you so much, Paul, Jean-Simon, and Giacomo, for sharing your thoughts today. Thank you all.
Was that incredible or what? Okay, so maybe another round of applause, please, for the crew. I didn't plan for this, but I have to give you my takeaways. So, 3 things come to mind. One, I think it was Giacomo that said that impact real world, right? So startups make a dent in the world. So I found that was really fascinating. Second, Paul, this notion of discovering yourself. Right? So I think entrepreneurship is a journey of self-discovery and knowing what you like and what you don't like. And then the final one from Jean-Simon is the time is now. It's never been cheaper to build a startup. So I want to say really fascinating conversation. So we have another panel with 3 esteemed guests, the 3 largest VC firms in Canada. So I want to invite them up as I introduce them. So Magaly from iNovia, Sanjana from Radical, and Geneviève from BDC. I'll ask you to please get up, if that's okay. Magaly, you're on the second chair.
I'm going to do quick introductions. So Magaly, you're an entrepreneur, investor, 25 years of experience, sold a company called Password Box. You work at iNovia, which I believe is the largest VC firm, or one of the largest in the country in terms of AUM. Yeah. Yeah. Sanjana, partner at Radical Ventures, obviously AI focused. I know we're talking to Joëlle later, just after, and if I understand the story, Cohere came out of the Radical office, so really happy, and also congrats on the latest fund, 650 million. Yeah, so, and then Geneviève from BDC Capital, who leads funds and direct investments as well. So thank you all for being here today. I think it's obviously very relevant to talk to people that control such large pools of capital. You allocate capital on a very large scale. So I think the first thing I want to dispel or maybe understand from your vantage point is this myth of there's not enough capital in the country, right? So maybe Magaly, I'll kick it to you.
Sure. Well, I think that that was true maybe 10 years ago. We have a lot of capital to deploy in Canada. We're very proud to have co-led one of the largest VC round in the country's history with Radical. I think that maybe just one other one that was larger. So we're at $675 million US, co-leading Cohere's latest round with Radical. So there's plenty of capital in Canada, and I brought some more numbers to share with you guys. There's plenty of capital from private funds. There's plenty of capital from institutions like BDC, like guys like EDC, other pension funds, and we can absolutely have successes. I'm sure of that. I brought some numbers for you guys because I think that's important to share the numbers, because I think we hear very large AI funds and VC funds launched all the time out of Silicon Valley, and we hear numbers out of the US, but we don't hear numbers out of Canada enough. And so in 2024, AI reached a record high, accounting for 30% of all VC investments in Canada. I don't know if anybody knows that. Hey, AI-backed companies now represent 25% of Canadian VC funded companies, valued at 100 million and above. That's 13%. That's up 13% from 21-22 numbers. At iNovia, we've backed, and I'm sure you have numbers to share too. At iNovia, we've backed in the last year and a half to 24 months, 60 AI companies, 20 that are AI native out of iNovia Discovery and Venture portfolio. And of course, Radical just launched $650 million fund. iNovia just launched growth, near $400 million fund, and iNovia early stage launched in 2022, $325 million US. So at iNovia, we have between early stage and growth at all times near $1 billion Canadian to deploy. So there is capital in Canada. What I want to make sure that the researchers and that are starting ideas and that are thinking about startups know that, because a lot of you are publishing papers that we don't always see. We don't see all of the papers you're publishing. We don't follow all of them. And all of a sudden, there's like a US fund coming in, and you get funded, and we're like, what? What happened? How come we didn't hear about this great researcher? So all of you in the room, there's plenty of capital. Think about also your economy and your country and building wealth in your backyard. It's also your job to think about Canadian investors. I was an entrepreneur, and I know that it's important to have co-investors that are US and European, because we're building global companies. All of us want to build global companies. But make it your mission to think Canada when you're fundraising. It's fantastic to have a US fund coming in and preempting around or just out of a research paper. But we're here, and we want to back you as well. So.
And Sanjana, you're obviously very close to the AI research community as well, and on your website you publish your own work, which is really cool. What are your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't have much to add, except that the biggest pools of capital actually exist in Canada. Majority of the US funds are funded by the biggest pension funds that exist in Canada, like CPPIB, CDPQ, PSP, others. Brookfield is a big investor in funds. And so there is enough capital here. It's time to build. And I don't think founders or researchers should be demotivated if one investor in Canada says no because the thesis doesn't align. I think there's enough capital that's available both in Canada and globally for you to build, and I think that's the major message over here. It's time to build. There's enough capital here and all over the world to fund your innovations.
What can I add? I think it's. I really liked your comment about how it's important for a Canadian company to have Canadian funding. It's a responsibility, I think, for the investors, but also for the entrepreneurs. I agree there's enough funds in the market. I would only say that it's cyclical, like everything else. In these days, because of what we live in the world we live, uncertainties make investor want to invest in less risky asset, and you know that venture cap is probably the most risky asset. So we're going to see a little bit of shift. So this year we forecast that it's not going to be a great year for VC. We're seeing year to year 26% decrease year over year in terms of amount of investing, but it's cyclical and it's going to come back. And so I agree with you also. Being said no by a fund doesn't mean that your project is not good. There's the, what did you say, the product market fit is like love? I would say it's the same thing for fund. You have to find the right one.
Can I add something? A couple years ago, iNovia launched a Discovery Fund 1 to help bridge the gap with early stage investing. We invested in 21 emerging managers in Canada, in US, and we have a pre-seed fund in Europe also, to really bridge that gap. So we're very proud. And there's hopefully Discovery 2 coming up in Q4 in collaboration with large institutions in Canada. So we're very proud of having put this together, and we did a total of about 60, 70 pre-seed investments. So full stack investor. And I think that's important to know that.
Well, Geneviève, you mentioned a very astute point about cyclicality, right? The ups and downs of the market. I'd be curious to hear from the three of you how you see the state of this two-letter buzzword that everyone's been talking about, because it seems that that particular industry in AI, obviously, has been less impacted. If anything, there's talk of a bubble. Curious to hear you how, because of where you sit, you look at the chessboard, you've invested in multiple AI startups. How do you see specifically funding for AI companies today?
Well, you're right. I think it's been protected in terms of volume of transaction. You mentioned 30% of the transaction are AI, and so that's a lot. But I would also say that the valuation are beginning to be a source of concerns, and we don't all agree. But when we go into, I don't write the check. I have to go to investment committee, and this is the question we're all asking. Okay, does that work in terms of the return we're gonna make?
So I obviously come from a very different perspective. We launched our first institutional fund in 2019. At the time, we were the only AI fund in the Western world. Nobody knew us. Nobody cared to have conversations with us except researchers from Mila and Vector and Amy and other institutes in the US and top AI universities. And we've just been in the eye of the storm since 2022. We have been able to raise massive funds. We started with a $325 million fund. We now have $2.5 billion of assets under management. We're actively investing out of two funds, a $650 million early stage fund and $800 million growth fund. We are truly in the eye of the storm. We have an IC investment committee meeting, which usually happens maybe once a week or once in 2 weeks. We have like 3 to 4 a week. We have them on weekends. Our inboxes are overflowing. I have not responded to so many people, and it's just because we're drowning right now. And so from my perspective, like, AI is the, it's what is being invested right now. Investors have to be careful not to invest in companies that are like .ai in their, on their websites. That's not a problem for this audience, obviously, which is extremely technically deep and, in fact, pioneers. But I think there's never been a better time to build an AI company, and there's also never been a better time to sell AI products. What we're seeing with our own portfolio companies and the companies that we're evaluating every day is that revenue is growing from like 0 to 10 million, 0 to 20 million, 0 to 50 million. Obviously, we double check that revenue on, if that's actually sound, if the revenue is durable. But there's also never been a better time for market pull for AI products. And I was talking to a leading professor from Mila earlier today on BCI, which used to be so difficult to fund back in the day, and it's the flavor of the season in the Bay Area right now, and companies are getting funded left, right, and center. So everything from very deeply technical, hardware-oriented companies to applied AI companies, I think it's a great time to be an AI founder. Maybe not an AI investor with the valuations we have to deal with, but definitely.
Well, it's still a debate, right? Because if we see the revenues, the growth, then it works with the valuation. It's a debate. I don't know.
The one thing I can add is that at iNovia, we continue evaluating those AI companies. And I'm not calling it a buzzword, by the way. I don't think AI right now is a buzzword. I think it's real. I think it's going to affect, we all know it's going to affect every single sector, every department of every company. So we see a lot of AI companies, obviously, same thing as you guys. We evaluate them the same way we evaluate vertical SaaS, regular SaaS companies. We look at the team. Is this a team that we want to do business with, that we want to hang out with for the next decade? We review the tech. We have a CTO office with a dozen experts that understand AI inside out. Is this a wrapper on top of an LLM, or is this a real company, a real product, a real team? Do we have something real here? And what is the total addressable market? Early on, the total addressable market is key. If the total addressable market is too small and it's too niche, we will probably not invest. If the valuation is 3 times bigger than we think it should be, and we're going to be stressed about growing into this valuation for the next 2 years, we're probably going to pass. So we're evaluating AI companies the same way we evaluate regular tech companies.
You mentioned a point, Magaly, before about the US investors, right? I feel like it's a little bit like the gorilla in the room, right? Because I've seen it firsthand, like US investors coming to Mila and poaching top talent. And I'll always tell founders, like, get the best possible terms from the best possible partner. But oftentimes it kind of sucks for the Canadian economy that we lose ownership of the best and brightest minds at a very, very early stage. So I'd be curious to hear you, kind of two-part question. One is like, what do you think as Montreal in particular, since we're sitting in Mila as an AI hub? I feel sometimes like we don't get enough credit for Mila, so I'd love to hear you about Mila. And second, you kind of mentioned it a bit, Magaly, about working alongside the US. What is that dynamic? How should we think about US investors? Or kind of 1A and 1B?
Well, we need to collaborate. I'm a past tech entrepreneur. I had in my cap table US investors at every single round. I also had Canadian investors. US investors are important for the ecosystem. They're important for the revenue, the ARR. We're selling into the US. The US market is 10 times bigger than the Canadian market. If you want to build a global company, you need to sell into the US. And often US investors that are our collaborators, our friends and our co-investors, they bring a lot of value. So it's a matter of, often when I'll put them a term sheet, then of course, there'll be 3 US investors at the table. If you've built a trusting relationship with the CEO, then he'll be open and say, hey, like, I really like you guys. I trust iNovia. You have a good reputation, or I trust Radical or other Canadian funds. But I really want a US investor in my cap table. Do you mind reducing your check size, and will you accept a co-lead? Of course I'll say yes. I'm not going to lose the deal. Yes, of course I'm going to. I know these guys. They're great. They have a massive fund. I've I've done other deals with their partners. They're great people. I'd love to work with them. So it's the collaboration that's important. What gets me upset and when I lose sleep at night is when I see a huge round going on with a company in Quebec City or Sherbrooke or Montreal, and they didn't even call us. Okay, maybe I didn't do my job and I didn't come forward and I didn't knock on your door, but as a Canadian that has studied in Canada, that do your research in Canada, you have got to give Canada a chance here and think about building wealth in your own backyard. And as a tech entrepreneur, and now as a tech investor, that's really, really important for me. And when iNovia announced in 2018 that I had joined in 2017, we were going to have growth capital all the way to the IPO alongside our LPs, that we can actually raise hundreds of millions of dollars with the collaboration of our LPs in a matter of a few days at iNovia and at Radical. We do have that capital, and I think some entrepreneurs don't know that.
Yeah, so maybe I'll start with Mila. I think without a doubt, globally, and this is not just locally, globally, Mila is recognized as one of the best research institutes in the world that produces, breakthrough AI research and the top AI talent. Majority of the lead AI leaders in the world have passed through the Canadian AI institutes, and many of them have passed through Mila. We just invested in a company called Periodic Labs. It was a small investment. It was a massive round. It was a $300 million round. Liam Fetus, who is the founder of that company, was a student of and worked very closely with Hugo, who you heard from earlier today, the new scientific director of Mila. So this happens all day, every day. And so I think that, again, my call to action through this entire day is just to encourage all the brilliant minds over here to get building or go work with some of the best builders, AI builders, both here and globally, to create your impact. In terms of Canadian versus US funding, we are a global fund. We're investing in Canada. We're investing in the US. There's no doubt the US investors are going to come here and invest. And I think a rising tide lifts all boats. So I'm supportive of the best partnerships emerging and the best companies coming out of our ecosystem, regardless of who invests. Obviously, it would be ideal if we could all partner. But I think the bigger problem is people not incorporating in Canada. So I think it's great to maybe go and partner with a firm from the US or from Europe, if that's what aligns with you and if that's the partner you want to work with for the next 10 years through ups and downs, because that's actually the most critical factor. But what I'm seeing more than ever is people just packing their bags, leaving, and the US is giving out O1 visas like never before. Everyone's focused on the H1B, but the creme de la creme of technical talent gets O1 visas. And those are being handed out like candy to students from McGill, from Waterloo, from UFT, from UBC. And I think that's a little bit of a problem. I think this is much more of a macro level issue, and that we're working to solve, which is we should be having our companies incorporate here, take advantage of the benefits to incorporate here, which is huge tax benefits and grants that you get for hiring technical talent. Even if you're building a global company, US companies are hiring technical talent in Canada, so it's a huge cost benefit for companies to incorporate here and have a US sub. And also, second, when you exit, it is far more beneficial to you as a founder, if you're Canadian, to be incorporated in Canada in terms of what you get in your hand at the end. So I think that's a larger issue that we should be solving for, but I think we have to be practical. We're building global companies. We have to sell globally. The US is the biggest market that there is. It's at our border. It is a big advantage, but I do feel like companies should incorporate here and create US subs versus doing the opposite at the get-go. The most sophisticated US investors actually do not care about this and have invested in a large number of Canadian incorporated companies with US subs. So if they do tell you that you have to incorporate in the US that is false. And you can message me, and I can help you through that.
I'm curious to hear you, Geneviève, on this question.
That was great. I agree with you in terms of AI Hub. Mila is one of the best, and we're very lucky to have a hub like that in Montreal, and there's a lot of upside for investors in Montreal and Canada and elsewhere. I asked my team to find one of a recent investment that we made in an AI company where Mila was involved, and I fell in love with that company. And if you go on their website, if you're like me, you're going to spend too much time because they have a demo of their thing. It's the name of the company is called Vivid Machines. It was founded by Jenny Lemieux and Jonathan Binas. They worked with Yoshua Bengio on their doctoral studies. And what it does is it puts data on, it gets data from every plant. So what they do is they try to improve the récolte. Harvest, thank you so much. Harvest of orchard and vineyard. So they put data into each plant to have more accurate decisions. So you can see that in terms of labor, which is an issue, in terms of water consumption, in terms of a lot of metrics. It works very well. So if you go on their website, make sure you have time because the demo was really cool.
Maybe a question for you, Sanjana. You're close to the research community. When you're reading a paper, what sticks out to you? Like, if you have to give advice to academics here, like, oh, this is like a venture scale idea. Have you thought about this question? Any insights there?
Yeah, so I think Radical was founded with the principle that we wanted to fund AI researchers who wanted to commercialize their technology. And so I'm so happy to be here today because that is exactly what we're talking about, which is the word venture scientist. I think there are a few things. One is the person who is leading that research has to be ready to move from research into building a company. So one thing that we talk to and have like one-on-one conversations with these founders or researchers who want to become founders is that, listen, are you ready to not actually do any more research and in fact just be dealing with annoying investors, annoying customers, trying to retain talent and doing everything but research? Sure, of course, you shape the research direction of your company, but there is very little research that that particular person is going to do. And so I think that is one very important conversation to have with these founders when they are beginning to think about a journey towards entrepreneurship. The second is timing. Now, timing is a bit of luck, but it is a little bit of research and a little bit of understanding of where the market is. I think the benefit of where we are today, at least with some of the more de-risked research advances, is that I think it is just time to build. It's just time to go for it. Like we were with okay, interesting anecdote. We've been investing across the stack. So we're dealing with, top researchers, but we're also dealing with AI native engineers that come out of like top universities like Waterloo, Stanford, etc. The AI researchers, their approach to company building is take 1 year of, researching and trying to talk to customers and seeing if there's demand for their products, making sure everything is just, perfect before they go out to start a company. What we're seeing with some of the younger AI native engineers who are building more applied businesses is they're just going for it. They're going for it, going from 0 to 250K in revenue, 250K to 2 million in revenue, and they're just learning, iterating, going where the market is pulling, and starting. So I think both sides can learn from each other. The researchers, I was with a researcher and his postdoc student and his PhD student last evening till 6:30 in Toronto, and he's been talking to me about this idea for a year. And I was like, listen, just go for it now. Like, stop thinking. You have to, you've already spoken to enough customers. You can attract incredible talent. You need to start, and like the founder panel, I think, which is the most salient panel for today, and Joëlle's, not ours, Joëlle's and then the founder panel, is that what they were saying that you have to be okay to fail. So the other thing with researchers is that they're top students. They've been top of their class since high school. They've been top of their class in university. They're doing incredible research. And so they're not very comfortable with failing. And I think it's totally okay to fail. I was telling the same researcher transitioning into being a founder that, you know, even if you start and you fail, you will still be a very marketable, you know, person in this ecosystem, because AI is not going away. It's a fundamental platform shift. So I think that there is a lot of research to do on timing and market timing. And you know, the traditional way of evaluating a company is team, total addressable market, technology, and timing is part of that. But I think right now, for this audience, I think if you have a breakthrough, you can attract incredible talent, you are getting some signs of market pull, and you are ready to make that transition from research to being a CEO of a company or a founder of a company, it's time to just go for it.
I agree with you, and maybe you want to add that anyone can be an entrepreneur. We have that image in our mind that it's a type A male, I don't know what age, but even an introvert, even everyone can be an entrepreneur, and I think that's the message. And I'm going to quote Steve Jobs here. He said, "I'm convinced that about half of what separates successful entrepreneurs from the less successful ones is pure perseverance." And I think it is. I think he was right. He wasn't always right, but on this one he was.
Magaly?
Well, you don't have to call it failure. You can call it pivoting. That was every startup I was part of before becoming a VC. We pivoted at least twice before making it a success.
With time running out, maybe a final question. There's a lot of academics, potential founders in the room. If you were approached by a student or a researcher, can you elaborate any advice you'd give them, either on fundraising or building their company?
Well, the best advice that I can share is make sure, and I've made that mistake as a tech entrepreneur, make sure you build an amazing team. That is the most important. Surround yourself. If you're a researcher and you're great at researching, hire an amazing head of product, an amazing head of, you have to think about selling this. So if you're great at researching and building, well, maybe you're not going to be that good at thinking of the marketing strategy to market this and sell it. Because I've seen unbelievable products that are not sellable because they didn't think that the price point of what they built, no companies that are the potential customers have the budget for that. What's the budget of the companies that are wanting to buy your product? All of these things, you know, the head of marketing and the head of sales are going to help you. So in my first startup, I was thinking about runway. I don't want to dilute myself. I want to raise as less money as possible. So I built very average teams because I was hiring people that didn't cost very much. In my second startup, we hired people that we couldn't afford. But they got us to being super successful so fast that we were able to have a higher valuation because we were meeting budget and we were meeting our milestones. And at the board also, build an amazing advisory board with top product people, top salespeople, and they will save you years. That will be the best advice I can give.
I think that is truly the best advice. It is all about talent. The other thing I will say is that for us as an AI fund, it's not only about identifying top AI talent, but also helping and supporting them build giant AI companies. And so finding investors or partners who can help you do that. For example, we have a Velocity program, which is a carefully designed program to help our portfolio companies scale. So we have a talent team that goes out and helps you recruit exceptional AI talent and convinces them to leave like incredible jobs at leading frontier labs and join our companies. We have a compute program to negotiate. Daniel from Radical is here, who leads our compute program. And we've negotiated billions of dollars of compute for our portfolio companies. And we can help with access, pricing, flexibility. We help with go-to-market. We help with brand as well. And other funds have different offerings. But I think it is about also finding partners that can help you scale and help you build a giant company along the way.
Also, I would say, of course, financing or raising capital can be intimidating, but there are incubators and accelerators, and that's one of their roles, to make your company or the beginning of your company investor-friendly. So, and in Quebec and Montreal, we have many very good accelerators and incubators, so please use them if you want to go a bit further, faster.
Very wise words. I could probably take another hour to learn from you three. So Magaly, Sanjana, Geneviève, merci beaucoup. And on behalf of the audience, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
We're going to take a quick break. We're going to be back starting at 3 p.m. sharp with Joëlle and Sanjana for our keynote fireside chat. Merci beaucoup.
All right, folks, we're going to get started in just a minute. Maybe just to talk about the previous panel for just a second. Like, that was really fascinating. So I'm close to that world of venture investing, and I want to say those three people are super inspirational. So I would say if they haven't left, chase after them. Get their proverbial business cards. So what's followed up next, we're going to have the keynote panel with Joëlle and Sanjana. It's also being live streamed. The whole event's being live streamed. So you'll have access to the recording. It'll also be a podcast after. And then after the fact, if you're able to stick around, we're going to have a little bit of live music and entertainment, so you guys can stick around, more than welcome to. And I think that's going to be it. I'm just curious, maybe, how's it going so far? You guys happy with the content? Going well? Yeah, there you go. All right, good. Okay, so we worked hard, and obviously it was a lot of the Mila Ventures team that put a lot of work into this. And I think with that, we could probably get going. I want to welcome back Mr. Hugo Larochelle to say a few words to kick us off.
Thank you, thank you. Hi again. Really good again to see all the energy. And I believe now we're also joined by some people online for the next portion of this event. So welcome. So here at Mila, earlier we've heard some really insightful perspectives on going from research to building towards real-world impact. And I'm convinced we'll learn even more in our next conversation. So this portion is part of Radical Ventures' annual AI Founders Masterclass program, which we're hosting here at Mila as part of our Rise of the Venture Scientist event. Radical is an AI-focused venture fund. Their portfolio includes Cohere, World Labs, Hebbia, and 50+ other companies. And to tell us more about the transition from research to building towards real-world impact, I'm really glad to have our two exceptional leaders to explore that question. So first, Sanjana Basu, partner at Radical Ventures, who's been with Radical since the beginning, and I know is very keen to nurture the next multi-billion-dollar AI company from Mila in Canada. And joining her is someone I've had the privilege of knowing for many years, Joëlle Pineau. She is now Chief AI Officer at Cohere. She's professor at McGill and a core member here at Mila. Previously, she was at Meta for nearly 8 years. She served as VP of AI Research. She led the FAIR team, and she helped guide the development of Llama, and generally has been a really strong advocate for open source contributions in AI. Joëlle's journey is a great example of moving from research to impact, from academic research to leading AI development in Meta's FAIR team to shaping product strategy at Cohere. And she understands the rigor of academic research and how that contributes to the reality of building products that work in the real world. So Sanjana, Joëlle, thank you both for being here. And Sanjana, I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Like I said before, I am thrilled to be here as part of this incredible production by Mila. At Radical, we were launched to support researchers commercializing their businesses. We helped Aiden build Cohere. He was the author of the Transformers paper. We were early investors in Raquel Urtason's company, Wabi, autonomous trucking company, and also Gennady from CentML. So this is our bread and butter, and I'm really thrilled that we're so aligned in our mission right now. So this particular session is part of Radical's AI Founders Masterclass. This is an exclusive annual program that we developed to help researchers commercialize their business, give them inspiration and practical guidance on how to do so. This is run over a 4-week period every year where we host global AI luminaries like Joëlle, as well as successful AI entrepreneurs. And we complement that with a practical lab, which is a more tactical session on AI product, AI go-to-market, how do you fundraise. So thank you for joining us today, both in person, and we have a huge audience virtually as well as part of the AI Founders Masterclass. And before I jump into the session, I do have a few housekeeping items. So for those of you who are not signed up to participate in our AI Founders Masterclass, you can email kate@radical.vc or come find me or my colleague Daniel later in the networking session, and we can help you do that. Tomorrow, as part of our practical lab, we are going to hear from Justin Lee, who is the chief storyteller and co-founder of Hello Astro, a branding studio for startups who will focus on how to explain your startup so people get it. That session takes place an hour later than today, so 4 p.m. Eastern. Next week, on Wednesday, October 22nd at 4 p.m., we'll hear from Jonathan Frankel, Chief AI Scientist at Databricks for our masterclass. And the practical session is led by one of our founders, Ori, from Offdeal. Offdeal is an AI native investment bank, and he talks about how to integrate AI from day one into everything that you do, from obviously building product, but selling, customer success, marketing, etc. For this session, we're going to have time at the end, 20 minutes for Q&A, that we'll take both from here live as well as virtually. And now, finally, we get to what we've been waiting for all day. I'm super pleased to ask and very honored to be here and speaking with Joëlle. Welcome to the AI Founders Masterclass, Joëlle. Thank you for your participation. So maybe the first question for you that I think is on top of everyone's mind is your recent transition from a global leadership position at Meta to Cohere. You, as Hugo said, that you led FAIR for nearly 8 years. You've now joined Cohere as Chief AI Officer. What attracted you to Cohere, and how are you going to approach this change from a research and product perspective?
Well, thank you. So glad to be here with you, Sanjana, as well as with all of you here in the room, online as well. It's been such an interesting transition. You know, to give some context, I'm someone who, quite honestly, have never had a career plan. I live in the moment, and right now that moment is characterized by what I would call joyful chaos. And so when I left Meta in May, I did not know where I was going to land. I was hoping to, at least enjoy a few months off, but quickly found myself just drawn to explore what could be and what I wanted to do next. Lots of different conversations with a ton of different people. I think really what attracted me to Cohere is a few things. One, I'd spent a number of years in a very large company, and maybe it's good to rewind a little bit before that. When I went to what was at that time, Facebook, when I joined 2017, was a really interesting point for machine learning, where we were starting to see a bit of a divergence in terms of the type of research you could do in an academic lab versus the type of research that you can do in the industry lab. The amount of resources, the access to compute capacity were really starting to change. And so I was very curious to see what it was that you could build when you had access to that level of resources, that amazing concentration of talent as well. And so that's what attracted me there. But, you know, after a cycle of 8 years, I had a sense that I understood what was possible, what could be done, and I was ready for another challenge. So Cohere is that other challenge in the sense that it's a much earlier stage company. The company's at about 400 people. A really talented team also, less resources perhaps, though I think there's a lot of potential to build interesting tech, and already it's a company that has shown that it could build good quality models, whether it's the command line of models, the IA line of models, and so on. And so it's interesting to be in something that's earlier stage. It's interesting also for me to sort of spread my wings beyond research. I think at a place like Meta, I'm leading research, and I did so for a number of years. It's not clear how to spread your wings beyond research in this case, where there's so many sort of expert of their domains, you know, people with product expertise and info and so on and so forth. You get into something that's earlier stage, and you know, everyone just gets their hand dirty getting done what needs to be done every day. So that was appealing to me. They're really focused on making AI that works in practice. And it's one thing to be in the consumer space, you ship something, it goes to billions of people, but you don't necessarily get that signal of, is AI actually working or not? Is it actually bringing those productivity gains that we are promising to everyone? You go into a setting where you're selling AI to enterprise and to governments, and it takes longer to get your foot in the door, but then you get real signal of whether there's value there or not. And in some sense, I feel like I'm gonna learn a lot that will inform me in terms of, you know, what is the potential of AI. Maybe at some point I'll wanna go back deeper into research and solve some of these problems, but right now I'm just really keen to learn about that.
Awesome. I did see some people laugh in the room when you said that Cohere has perhaps less resources, but that it depends on the perspective. I see Marc over there laughing. So coming from FAIR to Cohere is less resources. But anyways, so for those in the audience, I think the next few questions are probably most salient. Joëlle, you touched upon this already, but I really want to dive deeper into what truly motivated your move from academia to industry when you first went to FAIR. At first, I think you were balancing McGill, your commitments at McGill as well as FAIR, and then you dived right in and you led a massive global team. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think I first, you know, came to McGill in 2004. I think a little nod to my friend Denis Terrier here, who was influential in bringing me here to Montreal, to McGill. At the time, I had no idea what I was doing. You know, you walk into an academic role and, you know, I knew how to do research on something very narrow called POMDPs. I don't know how many people still know what POMDPs are. World expert on POMDPs. But yet I didn't know how to teach. I didn't know how to write grants. I didn't know how to supervise students. I didn't know how to build bigger collaborations and so on. And so it was a huge learning curve. I found an amazingly supportive, nurturing environment at McGill, in Montreal more broadly. And I spent a number of years sort of building up that, my research agenda, my program, my lab, and so on, which was great. But there too, I sort of got to a point where I felt a little bit, I had a good sense of how to do that job. I think I'm someone who does best when I feel I don't know how to do this job. Like, I show up in the morning and I do not know how to do this job, and I'm back in the space right now, and it actually feels good. And so, you know, 2017, a lot of the research is done in industry, access to increasingly more amount of compute power. The teams are more senior. It's a number of more experienced researchers working together, not necessarily grad students, though of course there's interns and so on. There is a sense that the research you're doing has the potential to go into product. So being able to be part of that transfer from research all the way to product and understanding how that works. You know, in the university lab, I'd worked on some project, for example, on AI in healthcare with clinical partners, but we never got to the stage of bringing this all the way to patients. And so that opportunity was what attracted me there. And I will say at a place like Meta, you know, over time I got more responsibility. When I started, I was responsible for the Montreal lab, a team that is still up here, a little nod to them as well. And then I took on responsibility for all of the AI research teams globally, which was definitely a bigger challenge, but it came gradually over time. Then spent the last 18 months or so in the company leadership team, the executive committee, Mark Zuckerberg's sort of small leadership team. The company was going through a massive pivot towards becoming AI first, and frankly, he needed people in the room who knew what AI was to help bring the company along and inform the strategy. So that was also an amazing opportunity to bring in what I know to the room, but also to learn from all these other people who were running much bigger teams, who had a long history of having amazing product impact. So that was exciting too.
Incredible. And we will get to some of this. And I did touch upon it in the last panel, but like this is what we were talking about how Mila produces global leaders who are at the helm of top companies. And so there's a lot that we can do from this ecosystem. We just talked about the academic to industry journey. I'm also curious about your research to commercialization journey. You've been working on frontier research, but you've also built and overseen applications of AI. I know in the last panel I discussed just go for it, but there's much more to that. So how do you think about when research is ready for commercialization or when it has true market potential?
It's always really hard to judge that gap between the research and what's ready. I would say I am someone who's always been curious to go back and forth between the more theoretical side of research and the more applied side of research. You know, throughout my research career, on the university side, we built a robot wheelchair project. We built wheelchairs. We partnered with clinical specialists, with companies, and so on. Some of the students went on to do a startup with this technology. But I do think going back and forth between the two means that you get that feedback loop of, you know, on the more theoretical side, you can take on problems in maybe a more distilled form and make some progress. And then you get to confront this with the real world and see what actually works, and you feed that back into the research. So I do love being able to access sort of the full cycle of innovation in that way. But this question you ask of how do we judge whether something is ready or not, there's always a big part of uncertainty there. You know, how to judge that gap between what works in the lab, what works in theory, what works with a particular data set before you put it out in the wild. It often comes down to data and evaluations, like setting the right evaluation protocol to give you as much of that signal. But even there, I've seen, you know, you just have to do the leap at some point. It takes someone with conviction, someone who sees the potential, and also someone who's just willing to stomach the risk of doing it. And that risk can come in different forms. Sometimes, you know, you make that jump and it just doesn't go where you want, or it takes longer, or it costs a lot more. You never quite know, and I've faced that many times. It really helps when you're sort of working together towards the success of the project. I've seen cases where the research team is sitting in one place, a product team is sitting in somewhere else. You kind of throw the model over the fence. That does not work well. We evolved the process when we were at FAIR that was framed as a graduation. So often we would have some ideas, technology that would graduate from one team to another. It's a positive way to frame it. And also, you know, that graduation, it wouldn't be just knowledge or assets that would move, like people will move with it too. There's some of that knowledge that resides in the people. And so we would usually have a couple people switch over teams, and that ensured that there was deep knowledge of the technology. It also ensured that like the link to the team that initiated the work was still very strong, and so that was usually a better mark of success. But even there, I want to say it's almost like every one of them is a one-off, but every one of them you learn and you get better every time.
That's super insightful. And maybe just one more question to go one level deeper into this research to commercialization or research to product journey. On the one hand, you've talked about the process at Meta, which is a large global organization where you can develop frameworks and processes. What would you say, or what advice could you give to the audience if they're starting at a small company, now that you're at a smaller company, Cohere, relatively? What works and what might work, what might not work in the transition from research to products that are actually working in customers' hands?
In all honesty, I'm 3 weeks into my job at Cohere, so it would be premature for me to show up giving anyone any lessons on this one. All I'm going to share is observations in terms of what works. I do think often when you're in an earlier stage company, it feels a little bit harder to take some risks in terms of, for example, like do research that is highly risky. But it feels a little bit easier to take other risks in that the product is less mature, you're earlier in the learning phase, and so there's certain things that some risks you're gonna have to take just to learn. And without that, you're never gonna get better at it, right? So a lot of what I'm doing in these early days is really just understand how the teams are working now, understand what research work is happening, understand there's, in this case, like a research team, a modeling team, and a product team. And so understand how each of them operates and what is the interface, the API between these teams.
Awesome. So that's a great transition into the next theme, which we will explore, which is on teams and team building and culture building. So I'm curious, Joëlle, for your perspective on technical team building. If you could give any advice to founders who are starting out to build a technical AI company, should they balance hiring technical talent first or product talent first? How do you balance like foundational research DNA and product DNA in an AI-first company?
I think it comes down to having clear priorities. And I'm not yet answering your question, but I find sometimes people are unwilling to have priorities. They want to do everything all at once, right? And so it depends a little bit of like, what's the runway you're giving yourself until you need to have like a minimum viable product? For some, it's gonna be 9 months, 18 months, 3 years, I don't know, but you gotta decide with your investors, what's the runway you have until that moment. That's gonna dictate a little bit how much you have to tilt towards more of the research or just the prototyping or really having a strong sense of product. What you can't afford to compromise on is, I think, having a strong vision and a narrative, because that's what's gonna make sure that everyone's working towards the same North Star. And so not having a North Star at all, I think, is the worst of these scenarios. Having a very clear North Star helps align all the efforts towards that, and then I would balance it based on the timing that you have. Sometimes you have to be opportunistic also. I think when you're very early days, everyone or many people have to be a bit of everything. So having an engineer that really can lean into product means that you may not need a product person quite as early. Depends on what's the complementarity of the team. I do think it's useful to have people who have a high level of trust, who can challenge each other, who have the ability to like hash out the hard decisions. Again, going back to this question of prioritization and clarity, have the ability to challenge each other in a really productive way.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And what about culture? You've been part of a massive organization like Meta, which balances both innovation with execution. How do you encourage, founders in this room to balance, or potential founders in this room to balance both innovation and execution? And what are the cultural traits that one must prioritize?
Yeah. This is an interesting one. You don't, you get trained as a researcher, you understand how to do research, how to apply the scientific methodology, how to write code, how to write papers, and so on. And no one really teaches you about culture, and yet it matters a lot. And I found, especially in my last few years, I was very much just like the curator of the culture more than anything else. By the time you get a mature organization, really strong bench of leaders, and so on. I was, as I mentioned, at FAIR for 8 years. I started, and over those 8 years, the field of AI changed tremendously. 2017 to 2025, huge shift in the field. Facebook, Meta as a company changed a lot in those 8 years. And FAIR as an organization changed a lot. We were about 100 people. By the time I left, there was about 600 people distributed over 10 locations. There's one thing that didn't change, and that is the set of values of the organization, which feels like so archaic to say, but my very first offsite, fall 2017, I met with the leadership team, and we wrote down on a board a set of values, and we carried them through. And as I was leaving, that still sort of was my parting message to the team. Those values carried us through. And in many ways, I think you could ask most of the people in the organization, they could tell you what the values of the organizations were without having to look back at the deck or anything like that. They were deeply ingrained in the culture of the organization. And they really characterized how we did the work. We called it our fresco: freedom, responsibility, excellence, scale, collaboration, openness. I think I will go to my grave being able to tell you what those values are. I live them, I breathe them, I sort of brought them daily to how we did the work that we did. And people think that values are like something on a slide, and yet you would be shocked how often they guided strategic decisions that we made in the organization. We had to make hard trade-offs about projects, about resources on a daily basis, and we'd go back to the values. And sometimes it's easy, you look at one value, but sometimes they would be in tension with each other. We wanted to open source something. We were committed to responsibility. It wasn't always easy to do. And so also being willing to live in the tension of these values was something we had to do. But yeah, those values carried us all the way through.
Incredible. There's a lot of questions I have from these comments that you've made, but maybe we can touch upon a little bit about your journey from leading one team in Montreal to leading the entire Facebook AI research team, to being part of Mark Zuckerberg's executive leadership group, which is probably no easy task. And I know that there's a lot of founders and potential founders in this room who have to transition from research to leadership. What advice would you give them in terms of maintaining research excellence, but also scaling the best teams?
Yeah, there's a lot that I learned sort of on the spot. I mean, to be completely transparent, right? I also had an amazing set of managers who helped me, and even going before that, during my where I was full-time at the university, I benefited immensely from a set of mentors, colleagues who were there to answer my questions, provide me advice, and so on. So I think, I was able to lean on other people every step of the way to learn. There's a few things that helped me. One of the ones that was most helpful, and it's something that, I sort of articulated more clearly while I was at Meta, but it's something I'm now carrying in my work at Cohere. It's something that I've shared with some colleagues here at Mila. It's this notion of I call it my +1 principle. You walk into a room, and each person in the room represents a part of work or a team. They represent a piece of the puzzle that we need to put together. And the +1 principle is when you're walking in carrying a piece of that puzzle, you are not responsible for this piece of the puzzle. You are responsible for the whole of the puzzle. And so the +1 principle meant that when I was leading one lab in Montreal for FAIR, I walk into the room with my peers who are leading the other labs. In that room, I am responsible for the success of all of FAIR, not for the success of the piece that I'm representing. And that changes the dynamic. It's not a zero-sum game anymore. It's all of us coming to the table with our point of view, with our ability to contribute to the mission and the goals. And when we do that all together, it gives us the ability to do something greater, and we're not all sort of pulling on our end. And so it was the same principle when I got to be, a member of the leadership team of Reality Labs Research, which was a much bigger organization. I'm not there to represent FAIR. I'm actually there to make sure that all of our Reality Labs research is successful. When I walked into the leadership team at Meta, and this is something like I observed in everyone else in that leadership team. It was not tolerated that you walk in that leadership team caring about your organization. You walk into that leadership team and you're responsible for the success of that company. And so that principle is something that's guided me. It took me many years to articulate it, but it's something that I then, shared back within my teams. It's something that I expected with every leader in my organization. I think without that, it's really hard to work as a team, and yet it's like a very simple concept. And similarly, I always think about it as the +1, because in some cases, you can't solve all the problems of the world every time. The +1 is about like just one scope bigger than your job description. That makes all the difference in the world, because carried at scale, that allows us to pull all of our work together.
That is super insightful, and I think can be applied as a leadership principle across various disciplines and domains, whether you're in academia and the corporate world or a founder of an AI company, large or small. Maybe shifting gears a little bit back to what you were saying about your values. I know that you've been a strong advocate for scientific rigor and reproducibility. Maybe I know probably your answer is probably going back to the values, but I'm curious about how you balanced that in a particularly fast-paced environment with different competing priorities.
Yeah. I see a lot of places where there's tension, but I haven't had difficulty balancing that rigor with speed, I have to say. And like maybe let me backtrack a little bit. As a scientist, I'm quite frankly just like in love with the scientific methodology itself. I often feel I could have been a researcher in any domain. I don't know how I sort of found my way towards AI. It was, of course, via robotics, but I could have been a researcher in a number of other fields. I love that process of asking questions and building a methodology that allows us to gain knowledge that we can trust if we do that with rigor. And so that to me is a way towards progress, quite frankly. And so it's something that, I don't know, deeply ingrained in me from when I started doing research. I was probably the one that had all these, tables of results and that systematically wanted to go through it and understand things in a very complete way, I would say. Whether they were theoretical or whether they were experimental. Something that I carried to my research lab, working with my students. And around 2018 or so, we found ourselves in a difficult situation with a few grad students I was working with in terms of reproducing specific results that were happening in the field. It was, we were trying to write a paper, make a point about a new algorithm and compare it to others. And we found that the way that the methodology was being carried out by other labs just didn't make sense. And my students were starting to take on some of these bad methodological habits, if I may, to be able to compare sort of apples to apples. They felt like, well, they're doing bad methodology, so we need to do the exact same bad methodology. And I said, I don't think so. And it led us sort of down a path of defining better practices in terms of reproducibility for empirical results, specifically in reinforcement learning, though we tried to carry this through and develop sort of a whole program around reproducibility, reproducibility challenge, checklists, and journal issues, and so on and so forth. Now there's a conference, first reproducibility machine learning conference happened this summer in Princeton, hosted by some of those who are carrying the movement forward. And I've been blessed with many amazing collaborators who go amongst many others who've been on this journey with me over the years. And so this is something, obviously, that I've also brought to the work that I've been doing on the industry side over and over again. I didn't find it that challenging to bring that as a value, because I think you just kind of ground it back to knowledge, and it's better to know, and this notion of rigor and reproducibility just gives you higher confidence in your results. So, we had an excellence axis in our values, and that's usually what would capture that one. At some point, you do need to decide when enough is enough in terms of experiments, like how many times are you going to reproduce this phenomenon? And so at some point, it's diminishing return, and then you just have to have a bit of a rational basis for deciding how much resources to put in that. But yeah, cutting corners is like a short-term win, and it doesn't pay off in the long term, as many have found out.
Very good advice. And maybe linking that to the point and really insightful comments you made on leadership, how do you identify the best leaders? Many in this room will go on to start companies that are small today that will become large moving forward. A big part of that is hiring and surrounding yourself with the best talent and the best leaders. How do you identify people who can align with the +1 principle? Is it just nature or nurture?
There's both. There's both. Like, I think people come into the role, and I've now had the privilege of sort of supporting the growth of a generation of research leaders, you know, research managers, directors, senior ICs, and so on. Some of it is definitely, like, people come to it with natural inclination. I think, you know, I talked about the +1 principle. That's one piece of it. I think, you know, another piece is just clarity of thought, and then, like, clarity of communication. It matters. It just does. Like, we are, you know, social creatures, and our ability to communicate our ideas is so important. And so I think that's something else that's really important. The ability to take risk is really important, especially in a large company. You would think a large company, you know, like, there's a whole set of processes for everything, but there's a ton of place where it's remarkable, like, the number of people who don't want to take a decision, and to just be willing to take a decision and say, yes, this is the decision. Yes, it is my decision. Someone doesn't like it, they can come to me, and maybe I will be wrong, in which case I will learn from that decision, right? Like, that is important too. And we got to a point at some place where, you know, there's a lot of escalation running. Like, no one wants to take a decision. It goes up to more senior members of the team. It's just terribly inefficient. It doesn't need to. We've already, you know, we've already discussed this. There's no perfect decision. We have the information we have, and a clear decision is better than no decision at all. So I think that also sometimes is underappreciated in terms of that. And then I would say accountability, like, being responsible for the work, like, being willing to, there's work to be done, being willing to sign up for it, being willing to say, like, yes, I will deliver this, and if it doesn't get delivered, like, I will be responsible for it. I think that's important as well.
Awesome. And maybe last question on this thread, and then we can move into the two last questions, which are slightly broader and macro on an AI perspective, is, do you think that there are different traits of leadership founders should prioritize at the early stage versus growth stage versus, like, a complete scale-up stage?
Definitely, and with the caveat that, you know, I haven't seen everything. I'm a big believer in building diverse teams. I do think, like, you build a team with all the same archetypes, it doesn't really go well. You know, even if you bring, like, a whole room full of superstars, if they're all the same kind of superstars, it's not necessarily going to go well. So having very complementary skills, making sure that you're covering all the pieces that you need to cover, and you can lean on each other as needed. I think that's really important. So that's usually what I look for, that as a team it works, rather than, like, any single individual. So it's looking at, like, what do you need to do and where are the gaps? I'm a big believer in, like, running at your hardest problem first. So decide, like, what's the biggest gap in terms of your team, and bringing someone who has that particular talent.
Awesome. Great leadership insights for all of us here. So the last two questions I have are more like macro in terms of where we are in the world of AI. Maybe the first question is, we touched upon this in the last panel on market timing. You've been through various AI cycles. Like you said, you've trained a whole generation of AI leaders. What can you tell us about market timing? Like, when is it the right time for a product to hit commercialization? And are we living in a different time today where you should just build what you want to build and just test and see if it's going to work because there is buying appetite?
that is always very, very hard. I'm sure you know, and many other people know too. You know, you always know right after if it was the right time or not. It's very hard to predict. I think right now a lot of people are wondering for a few different areas that are seeing a lot of activities. You mentioned BCI earlier. Robotics is also having a big moment. There's a lot of people, you know, we've been sort of up and down the cycle with robotics. There's a number of people who are wondering, like, is this the peak that's really going to take off, or is this the one that's going to kind of go back down? You know, impressive demos on robotics coming up, but it's not clear whether the robustness is there really, whether the efficiency, the cost and the power efficiencies are there yet to make a viable product on that one, which is the one I've stayed closest to. But I think a lot of that applies to BCI as well. You know, people have seen sort of the Neuralink devices and so on and are thinking like, oh, this is it. But do you go from like, you know, a small handful of patients to viable product at a price point and at a sort of volume that is necessary? We don't know. It's incredibly hard to predict. You talk to the ChatGPT team, and you know, 2 weeks before the release, they had no idea that this was the moment that it was going to launch. That's the reality, and yet it did. There was something in terms of the maturity of problem, and also just the reception, the maturity of the community to just seize that new technology. So super hard to predict. I think what's more important, two things. One is, it's, as I mentioned, being willing to take some risks, because that's how you're going to get the signal. If you need that little leap of faith. The other thing is, if it takes off, like, just be ready to run with it, right? Too many people don't take the risk, or they take the risk, but they're not ready for the upswing if it comes. And so, like, be ready for that upswing if it comes. Otherwise, it's a missed opportunity.
I think Joëlle has mentioned risk multiple times in various different contexts, from her academic journey to her leadership of a massive organization, and now to like a scale-up, a massive scale-up, one of the biggest frontier labs in the world. I think that is an important lesson for everyone in this room. And if you cannot get a hold of Joëlle when you think you want to take risk, just remember her in this form, and remember that it is okay to take risk, and you can be very, very successful if you do so. The last question is, Joëlle, your perspective. You touched upon it a little bit with what you said about robotics, but what excites you the most in the world of AI today, and where would you encourage builders to build? I know it's just your perspective, but we'd love to hear from you.
One person's perspective, take it for what it is. I think, honestly, I'm more interested in the macro question, right? Like, I think this is time to build in Montreal, time to build in Quebec, time to build in Canada. I am most excited about that. I have spent 8 years going back and forth with California. There's amazing people, amazing projects over there, but there's amazing people here too. So I'm a lot more interested in that. I would love to see us just fail a lot more, because, you know, having second, third time founders here means that we will have a lot more depth of knowledge and experience in the ecosystem that we can all benefit from. I think that's incredibly important. In terms of different areas, you know, it's hard to choose from. So I'll speak more from a personal point of view. I think one area I'm super excited about is all of the work on scientific discovery, materials discovery. I think that space is ripe for fast progress. I've talked to some people who are doing projects where they've seen, for example, the exploration of new materials shrink from something that used to take 20 years to discover potential new, in this case, crystals, to 1 year. In terms of the discovery cycle. This is amazing, and so I think that's one super exciting area. I think robotics is a super interesting area as well. I'm really interested to see, you know, some of the stuff that we're building at Cohere, which is bringing AI into the enterprise specifically for productivity gains with agentic tasks. Like, how far can you go with agentic AI? We talk about it a lot, but once you start giving actions to these assistants, agents, it opens up like a number of really hard problems. So I completely see the potential, and I also see the challenges ahead, the challenge from a technical point of view, the challenges in terms of a risk and a responsibility point of view as well. But I'm pretty bullish on a lot of this agents towards work productivity. I've seen it firsthand. I had the amazing privilege of having sort of 4 months off this summer, and I spent some of it just getting my hands dirty, getting back into coding and into building just at a tiny scale, like whatever I can do on my laptop in my kitchen counter. It's amazing how much more productive you can go, like, you know, from breakfast to lunch and build like a full prototype of a working mobile app when you haven't coded in 10 years. That to me is just like something that, you know, AI is completely changing. And so how do I go from like that experience of, you know, a Monday morning in August for me to the scale of major businesses and governments? Something that's going to be fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joëlle. This has been incredible. We're now going to open it up for questions from the audience here, but also online. So maybe we will start with the audience here and then go online. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Joëlle.
We probably need to get you some mics if you're asking questions so people online can hear you.
People going around with microphones, I heard. Is there someone that can... I'll do it. Thank you very much. So we have mics right for this. Does this work? Okay. Thank you, Joëlle. Honestly, true inspiration. And thank you to everybody who hosted this, Nectar and everybody else. You know, you mentioned that cutting corners doesn't pay off in the long term. And that made me wonder, do you think that, you know, in the large scale, do you think scale in laws is just basically a form of cutting corners and not actually pushing the innovations? And then the second question is, you know, you're as a strong advocate of the scientific method, and you know, the scientific method is basically just anti-dogma, right? So since the early modernity. And don't you think that what Karl Popper and Francis Bacon came up with, the scientific method, don't you think that it's like became kind of dogma now?
It became what?
Dogma itself.
Oh, that's a large philosophical topic. We might take the second question over the networking session. The first one, though, let me take that one. You know, is the scaling law sort of going against the scientific method? I don't think so, actually. I think there's like a very systematic way in which you essentially gain confidence from one experiment to know what's the next experiment to run. There's different ways to do it, and there's different ways to build your scaling laws, which are essentially like extrapolation. So you need to figure out how to do that extrapolation. But I do think there's a pretty systematic way to address this. Again, it doesn't mean that you have full certainty, right? The scientific method actually doesn't give you the answer before you've run the experiment. It gives you a sense of like how to phrase the question properly, how to build the methodology, and most important, how to take the finding and integrate it back into your base of knowledge to then extrapolate from there. So I see them definitely as one and the same. And there is a part of creativity that is required as part of the scientific method. There's a part of intuition. There's a part of just, you know, like inspiration that falls into that, and we shouldn't shy away from saying it, but we shouldn't not look at the data or not be willing to look at the data when that will get us to the answer faster.
I think we have time for one more audience question.
Thanks, Joëlle. Can you expand on material science? Like what, like you touched upon, like you're really impressed by the scientific discovery specifically on material science. Can you expand on it, and what has like really blown away your mind, and probably like what you see in next 5-10 years is going to be like, this is a game changer?
Yeah, and there's different variants of it. There's some of the work that's been done more on the protein side. There's some of the work that's been done on the molecular side, and so on. And so, without like picking one or the other, some of the work that I'm most familiar with is some of the work on AI chemistry that the team at FAIR had been doing. They've applied this across both like the discovery of new optical materials, but also the discovery of new catalysts for essentially like capturing energy and transferring energy. So I think these are cases where you can have a pretty specific formulation of the design space. Think of like, you know, a space of molecules with particular qualities. And there's a really nice cycle in terms of being able to synthetically generate different ways to essentially like different ways to configure the molecules and using AI to rank the way in which the different molecular structure are going to meet your desired properties. And so the acceleration is really about using AI to rank the hypothesis. Then you still need to take your top ranking ones and go run them in the lab. But I've seen cases where, for example, they go from like a combinatorial space that has many, many millions of possibilities, and they bring it down to like their top 20, and then they just run to the lab with those top 20. So this is where they get the amazing gain from like, you know, if they had to run through all the combinations in the lab without the ability to use AI to rank their possibility, it would be much slower to get to the final solution. So using AI to model, to predict how much a particular configuration is going to meet certain properties, I think is where I've seen some big gains.
Awesome. I'm going to read out a few questions from the virtual audience, and then if we have time, we can come back here. So Joëlle, when you said earlier that be ready to run with it when things start to work, do you think we're at a time where we need to be more optimistic about the future of AI, or that we should be more careful with AI moving as quickly as it is and the dangers associated with that?
I'm such a pragmatic person. I don't know that we need more optimism. Like there's a lot of optimism about AI. Some are worried we're in a bubble. To me, I don't worry about whether we're too optimistic or whether we're not optimistic enough. I will use a hockey metaphor. We're in Montreal, right? I feel we just need more shots on goals, right? So like we are doing a lot of research. How much of that research are we taking all the way to what it can be? Like the number of times where someone has an idea, I read the paper, I'm like, great idea. Then what? And like, oh no, I pivoted to this idea and wrote this other paper. I'm like, okay, great idea. Then what? Right? So it's that, like, what do you do after that? You've had the idea, you've tested it, you've written the paper, you got the feedback. If this is such a great idea, what are you going to build with it? Right? That's what I mean. We need to take that further along that innovation trajectory as researcher. And some of that, like, we can't just be dropping, papers on archives and waiting for someone else to take it on. I do think we carry a responsibility as researchers when there's something there to just carry it further.
Awesome. The next one is, when you joined the industry side of AI as an academic, what level of confidence did you have in machine learning back then? And were there any core skills, mathematical, engineering, or otherwise, that helped you adapt effectively?
I was very high confidence that AI was going to have a major impact, machine learning in particular. I came at a time where, already it was very well established that AI was useful in predictive tasks, that AI was useful for recommendation system. We were in the early days of AI being absolutely essential for content moderation at the scale of information that was shared on the internet. Like, there is no internet without machine learning because there's no way to sort through all of that vast amount of information, to take away the information that should not be included and shared and so on and so forth. So all of that was super clear in 2017. Mathematical skills, computational research skills, I think, for someone going into a position of leadership in industry, we're definitely must have. The thing that I'll tell you the truth, I think the thing that best prepared me for this job was having 4 children. I don't know how else to say it, like the interpersonal skills, the ability to relate, to talk, to listen to people, the ability not to sweat it if someone has a meltdown. Like that is just what really helped me navigate. Like this can be a pressure cooker kind of environment. I mean, the fact that, I had 4 children also meant I had like a partner who was willing to like step in if I was away and traveling and so on. Like, honestly, I know that's not like something you expect to say, but that's just my reality.
It's real advice. Thank you, Joëlle. You mentioned AI for healthcare. From what I can see, AI seems to be moving a lot faster outside of healthcare, especially with things like text, image, audio, video generation, than within healthcare. Why do you think that is? What factors are slowing down progress, adoption in healthcare relative to other industries?
Yeah, there's a few things. One, I think in healthcare, the nature of the data can be different. Not always, but can be different. A lot of the progress we've seen is, of course, with internet scale data, language vision, and so on, for very good reasons. A lot of healthcare data has other properties, can't be shared as easily. There's privacy considerations, there's safety considerations. It's also somewhat limited in scale, right? Like if you're looking at a particular condition, you may get like thousands of examples, but this isn't the same as having billions of tokens. And so the scale of the data is also somewhat limiting. And so that's some of the things that makes it difficult to completely apply the same recipe that's been effective in some of those domains to healthcare. That being said, I think there is tremendous work that is being done in healthcare. I think we're not always seeing the impact of this work in our healthcare system here in Quebec. That may be a topic for a broader discussion, but there's amazing work happening on AI in healthcare here in Montreal, whether it's through McGill, University of Montreal, one of our many research hospitals. There's really high quality research happening. Bringing that research into the current medical and healthcare system in Quebec and in Canada may be a little bit difficult. I see many practicing physicians, and frankly, they just need access to electronic medical records before they even get to AI. There's lots of places in the world that are just move faster on this, and where the integration of AI is a lot easier. I spent some time in France, including with folks at Doctolib, which is a company that's bringing AI straight to patients, to doctors. There's just so much further ahead, and that means they have the ability to integrate AI right in the platform. Because the platform already has penetration across society and the medical system, bringing AI there is much faster. I've talked to folks in California who are running online system, immediate access to an AI physician that can take away many of sort of the lower risk interactions and interventions is something that is a reality right now in California. So I think there's like the two pieces, right? There is some challenge with respect to this domain in terms of the data itself. And then there's a really big organizational and social challenge of being able to disperse that technology.
Okay, awesome. One last question from the virtual audience and then one from the live audience. When you mentioned agents as productivity tools have several open challenges, could you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, there's the technical side of building agents, which is we're enabling agents to use tools, to take on multiple agents, to orchestrate other agents. There's sort of a recursive aspect to this that just opens up the complexity in terms of how do we train these agents. So I think there's some technical questions of how to train agents that we haven't fully developed the right architecture for and the right training recipe for that. Then there's other interesting technical questions of how to train a collection of agents, not an individual agent. Right now, all the agents are trained for the most part as though they're singly deployed and everything around them will be a system of like human and corporations and not a whole bunch of other agents. And so from a technical point of view, I think there's a lot we haven't solved. There's a lot we haven't identified in terms of what are the real risks of these agents. I think with LLMs, we're now a few years in. We have the ability to identify very specific risk vectors, whether it's misinformation, whether it's hallucination, whether it's the ability to leverage these agents, for example, to create biological weapons, chemical weapons, and so on. So we have an ability to list the risks very specific. We're starting to have ways to measure those risks, mitigate them, so on and so forth. For agents, we haven't seen it. And often you try to imagine the hypothetical risks, and the real risks are not the same. And so to some degree, you have to deploy them and build up that knowledge from the practice rather than from the theory. And so there's a lot that we have to do in terms of getting that experience and then really quickly building up the methods that we need to make sure that we identify the risk, the potential for risks, and how to mitigate that.
Awesome. Okay, time for one more question. Sorry, we've not got one from that side of the room.
Thank you, Joëlle, and happy to see you. However, scarcely it's been over the past 8 years. My question was more. I was going to come back to something you mentioned about your love for pragmatism for the scientific process. And I was going to say that's something that requires forethought, tremendous forethought, which sometimes is associated with slowness. A contrario, sometimes, especially in the context of the industry, or even in general, even in research now, which is very fast-paced, people would value, the community would value fastness. How do you marry that both? The fact that you like forethought and the scientific process, where whilst you live in an environment like we do, which requires a fast pace, we have how many papers published at each conference every year? And that's the first half of my question. The second half would be, how even throughout your various positions have you balanced that in your industry work?
Yeah. It goes back a little bit to the question you asked earlier. I can't say I felt torn about this one, right? Like, I just feel there's an amount of information I need to take decisions, and I'm going to get that information that I need. And so when it comes to experimental results, like, you just sit down and get the results in order to support the claims that you're making, whether it's writing a paper. Like, if you want to make a particular claim, you need to have that particular result. The way to go faster is to make a smaller claim and have fewer results, and I'm cool with that too. The only scenario I'm not cool with is little results and big claim, right? So it's a choice, it's a trade-off. You can go fast, you can go slow, you can make a small claim, you can make a big claim. But it's just about being like coherent and consistent in terms of how you do it. So that's usually how I've tackled it.
But we do live in an environment in which, especially in AI, and even in tech in general, lots of big claims are expected to sell the technologies that we do develop. And to me, there's a conflict of interest there, whereby, if, for instance, if I were Joëlle Pineau working for Meta, or let's say Cohere,
for example,
perhaps there'd be an interest. The company would have an interest in developing products that are associated with big claims. Whereas for you, in order to make those big claims, you would require forethought and a slow process, which goes against what they want, because they want a fast process. And how would you?
They do, and I think some of the conversations that I had is, you want something, and sometimes you're doing research, and like, there's no magic here, right? Like, I cannot create magic, and so you just have to have integrity in terms of the work that you do. I've backed out of being on papers because I feel I couldn't put my name on this. I didn't have confidence on the claim of that. It's okay, someone else wants to put it out, that's okay. I've decided not to sign off on certain things, and in some cases we didn't go out with some projects. And I've dealt with big expectations from management who wanted to make big claims, and you try to deliver most of the time, and you try to be as transparent as possible about what are the claims that you feel are supported. At the end of the day, you do try to get along, but I feel there's a way to just stand up and say what you think, and quite frankly, as long as it's done respectfully from a place of integrity, a place of competence, usually it's well respected, and if it's not, then you should probably go work with other people.
Awesome. You. Thank you so much, Joëlle. Thank you so much for your time today and for being the leader that you are for this ecosystem, for Cohere, for the global AI ecosystem. And thank you to all of you for your participation.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to say a few quick words to wrap up, and I think I'm standing between you and the cocktails, so it won't be long. I just want to say a quick thank you to all the participants, and obviously for everyone that attended. I have to say, I'm feeling quite inspired. So hopefully, this for people that are considering, taking that step, from Mila, I would strongly encourage you. My one ask is there's this new team called Mila Ventures, headed up by Stéphane. So go see them, seek them out. I think we have their contact information on the screen, if I'm not mistaken. We're also planning a next event in less than 2 weeks' time. This one's going to be focused on AI and robotics. So with that, I have one final question. So for everyone that participated on the panels, Joëlle, Hugo, Stéphane, and the venture panel, please come up. We're going to take a group photo to close it out. Yeah, Marc, viens-t'en. Jean-Simon.